2017 seemed to be the year of Phasma. In the lead up to episode 8, they used almost all of the notable scenes in the trailers. At the beginning of September we got the Phasma novel from Delilah Dawson, and even though what I read was the hardcover released in 2018, the Captain Phasma comics ran from the same week in September that the Phasma novel was released, up until October, whetting the reader's appetites for the absolute shit show that was The Last Jedi. The Captain Phasma comic is the only comic that bears the Journey to banner for The Last Jedi, similar to how Shattered Empire was the only comic to carry the banner for The Force Awakens. It's a 4-issue series that was written by Kelly Thompson and illustrated by Marco Cicchetto. The story starts with Phasma recording a log about her last 10 minutes on Starkiller Base, and right off the bat they fuck it up. Seriously, not even 2 pages in and they fuck it up. Phasma escapes the trash compactor somehow. It's not really made clear how, but judging by the hole in the wall and the door on the opposite side, it seems like she's blasted her way out, and this makes no sense. We know from A New Hope that blaster bolts would just bounce around the room until it hit trash, so in a comic designed to show how Phasma escaped, it literally fails in its first step. It's worse because 2 pages later we see that in the main corridors of Starkiller Base, blaster bolts reflect off the walls of the main corridors, so they don't bounce off walls in the only place in the franchise where it's been shown they do, and they do bounce off walls in places there's likely to be blaster fire. It's fucking stupid. It's just more bullshit. It's The Last Jedi bullshit prequel. Also, Phasma's cloak is shown to be blaster-proof, and this particularly pisses me off because as well as having blaster-proof armour, this pretty much makes her invulnerable. So in a comic that exists purely because Rian Johnson clearly didn't bother watching The Force Awakens, in an effort to explain how Phasma escaped the destruction of Starkiller Base, all Kelly Thompson has done is managed to give the reader one more reason to ask the question, if Phasma is blaster-proof, why did she lower the shields on Starkiller Base? I mean, she's blaster-proof. What's the worst Han, Chewie and Finn could have done to her? The rest of the book is okay but nothing amazing, and in certain places it's downright lazy. While still on Starkiller Base, Phasma deletes the records that shows her lowering the shield and plants a log showing that someone else did, specifically Lieutenant Sol Rivers. Rivers escapes the base and Phasma follows him, commandeering a TIE fighter and its pilot. During the flight it's shown that there's a BB-8 unit on board, and I have to wonder just what the fuck happened to all the other droids in the franchise? Why is every new droid a BB unit? There's BB-8, this one, the one from Resistance, the one from The Last Jedi. Are there no R2 units anymore, or has Disney banned them in their attempt to erase the original trilogy from history? Phasma and the pilot land on a backwater planet and begin searching for the framed traitor, and there's a nice reference to the Phasma book where Phasma says she doesn't trust the planet, and that reminds her of another planet. This is of course a reference to her home planet Parnassus, which is looked into more in the Phasma novel, and it was a nice little nod to it. The comic and the book were released in the same year, so I'd have been surprised if it didn't reference it. But this is the Disney era of Star Wars, ladies and gentlemen, and apparently I have to point out every time they do something right, otherwise you might think I think they've never done anything right. While it was a nice reference, the planet seemed to be almost identical to Parnassus. In fact, it's so similar that reading the comic almost felt like a comic adaptation of the Phasma novel. It's so similar, in fact, that Phasma herself has flashbacks to her time trying to escape Parnassus. There's a flashback to Civ, one of the characters from the novel, but it was so short and never explored again, it seems like it was just included as a nod to that book, and that's it, rather than being anything relevant that would directly affect the story, aka fan service. So Phasma and the pilot find a group of people living on the planet, and in order to get their help they need to hide the fact that they're First Order, so they have to disguise themselves. I did like the fact that when Phasma and the pilot change into their disguises, when Phasma takes her helmet off, the reader can't actually see it, and therefore we can't see her face, and that's another reference to the novel, because once she puts the Stormtrooper helmet on in the book, nobody ever sees her face again. This is something that Disney have actually been running with, and there's no media where we actually see Phasma's face in full. Even in The Last Jedi's deleted scenes, the most we see of her face is that crack in her helmet. How did that crack get there? I don't know. Her armour is literally made of Queen Amidala's ship, which is why her armour is blaster-proof. So I guess, just like The Last Jedi, if you want the story to make sense, you're just going to have to write most of it in your head and apply it to the comic. So Phasma and the pilot have to find weapons on an old ship that brought them there so they can electrocute the sea creatures to go where Soul is, and of course it's forbidden and guarded by sea creatures, so Phasma has to go and get them herself. I don't know, it's kind of boring to be honest. It's another linear story, A to B to C to D. I also don't know how Soul got past all the sea creatures, but whatever, that's the part where you have to write the story. It turns out the sea creatures aren't nearly as Kraken-like as I thought, and when they get out of the water at one point, it's clear that they have 2 arms, 2 legs, a human physique, and the only thing that makes them Kraken-like is their faces and the tentacles coming out of their backs, which I really thought was a bit of a letdown. Even the giant sea creatures with tentacles felt lazy. For some reason they also shrink in size, which I thought was deceptive and another example of lazy writing, but hey, congratulations, expectations subverted. The monster Phasma fought first was gigantic, the rest of them were only slightly larger than a human. Maybe it's the offspring, but that seemed lazy to me. Why not have some big ones as well? Why did it have to be just human-sized creatures? After seeing the gigantic one, watching this army of human-sized creatures just felt boring. Eventually Phasma catches Soul and kills him, then kills the pilot too for safe measure. I have to admit, when she killed Soul, I was curious why he was saying he knew it was Phasma who lowered the shields, because I didn't remember seeing him watch her at the beginning of the comic, but I went back and sure enough, at the beginning of the book he's there pointing Phasma out to a stormtrooper. I also don't get why she brought the pilot along in the first place, other than for someone else to read about. I mean, it's Phasma. I find it hard to believe she doesn't know how to fly a TIE fighter, so bringing a pilot along simply created a new loose end that she had to deal with, and it made no sense for her to do that since throughout the whole comic the idea is that she's tying up loose ends. Of course, this in turn begs the question of how Soul saw her, since in that scene in The Force Awakens we clearly see they're locked in a room, Han standing guard before he locks the door, so it seems like Disney, not content with retconning the original trilogy, is now trying to retcon its own shit. It's happened, ladies and gentlemen, and I have to say, I thought it would take a lot longer for Disney to start retconning their own canon. Hell, in Legends it took 8 years before the retcons began, and that was only because George Lucas chose to ignore it all. Disney only lasted 5, and they're in control of everything. Pablo Hidalgo, ladies and gentlemen, doing a fantastic job as usual. Phasma reports back to base, and that's pretty much the end of it. The art was okay. Marco Cicchetto's pencils are nice to look at. He's drawn some good striking images with Phasma in all sorts of poses, but his colours are his usual fare and I'm getting sick of seeing it. The problem with Cicchetto is if you've seen one of his comics, you've seen them all. He uses this kind of ambient light effect which is really good, but sometimes it can really get to you. You can't help but notice the lack of colours and use of two-tone when you've been reading for about 100 pages. It's impressive the first time, but sometimes it's used a bit too much and a wider variety of colour would be welcome, and it's this same issue that a lot of people had with the first 2 volumes of Dark Empire. I also noticed that the TIE pilot Phasma took with her looks almost identical to Poe's mum in Shattered Empire. Angel and Sueta did the pencils for Shattered Empire, and you can see a difference in their faces, but Cicchetto coloured both comics, and it's really clear that the reason they look so similar is because of his colouring. They have the same complexion, the same eyeliner, the same eyeshadow, everything is the same except for the hairstyle, and it seems lazy to me. So overall, Captain Phasma is almost enjoyable, but still falls flat on its face. Unfortunately, in its effort to fix the plot holes in the movies, it creates even more of them, and because of that, it's just entirely pointless. The The only reason this comic exists in the first place is because Rian Johnson didn't have a clue what he was doing when he made The Last Jedi, and that's a shame because I can't help but think if this had been a 6-issue series that solely focused on telling a story about Phasma herself, rather than trying to fix Johnson's plot holes, it could have been a really good, engaging comic. I think writer Kelly Thompson could have been a bit less lazy with the writing, although I do appreciate the references to the Phasma novel, and Marco Cicchetto seems to be like a robot with no variation in his style, and the comic doesn't really explore Phasma's character much. It does show her character two-dimensionally well enough, with her framing an innocent man to hide her crime and showing her mettle and determination, but overall the Captain Phasma comic lacks the depth of character that the Phasma novel had. The fact is, the book just isn't that enjoyable because it shouldn't need to have been made in the first place, and it suffers because of it. It's not a book designed to make the reader feel good or tell a great story. It's a book designed to justify Rian Johnson's shockingly poor decisions. I didn't like Shattered Empire. It was the only comic leading up to The Force Awakens and it felt hollow, and the Captain Phasma comic felt the same to me, and based on that, whatever bullshit story they come up with to justify Phasma being in episode 9 or whatever comic they released this year with the journey to the episode 9 banner, I certainly won't be getting excited about it. Hopefully she won't be in 9 because JJ will be paying attention, but I wouldn't put it past Kathleen to have some woman power explain why she's not dead. So far, not a single book or comic release leading up to a movie has had any real bearing on that movie at all, and I don't believe this year will be any different. Still, as it stands right now, I've caught up with all the books and most of the comics, so this will be my first year reading the Journey 2 books before the movie is released and not after. But it won't make any difference. Based on the Aftermath trilogy, Shattered Empire, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, and Last Shot, any media released into the run-up of a movie will bear almost no impact on my perception of the movie. So when all the reviewers will be sitting there saying, I bet we see that character in the movie, or this is going to explain something in the movie, I'll just be sitting here laughing at their gullibility because it's just crap Disney are putting out to make money, and it's not one big story. You mark my words, not a single book released in the run-up to Rise of Skywalker will have any impact on the movie at all. The Captain Phasma hardcover doesn't come with a dust jacket, and that's bullshit. Shattered Empire didn't either, and I think I've cracked the code. If you find pictures online of the book and it has the longer Marvel logo on the spine, it won't have a dust jacket. If it has the regular Marvel logo, it will. But it's a hardcover, sold at the same prices as the ones with dust jackets, so it should come with a dust jacket. This is a practice Marvel needs to stop. So, Captain Phasma's story is bland and completely pointless, and fails to explain anything at all, and purely exists so Johnson can wank all over the franchise. The art, while good, is very colour by numbers in Cicchetto's one and only style, and it's really boring. The lore doesn't match up with the lore from the rest of the Star Wars universe, and it's a hardcover that doesn't come with a dust jacket, which means presentation falls flat on its face. There's literally no redeeming quality to justify the existence of this book.